Greetings sailors, and welcome to a little look at the USS Hill, which is one of the ships that you can get from the current Rogue Wave event, or Rouge Wave as Wargaming occasionally likes to spell it, apparently. This is a Tier 5 Premium US Destroyer, and this is the one that you get for completing all 4 of the directives, or all 4 stages of the directives. It's a fair old grind to get this ship, maybe not as much a grind as to get all the fuel tokens for the other reward, the USS Benham, which is a Tier 9, and you're going to need 800 fuel tokens to get that. And either way, you know, a lot of people are not very happy about just the sheer level of grind. You can essentially only afford to miss a couple of days. Now you can just straight up also buy the hill, and there might be some people who buy it for the collector value alone just because this is a ship that isn't represented in game already. It's an Edsall class destroyer escort, so basically a smaller class of destroyer, and it was actually named after one of the American sailors who died at Pearl Harbor, although the ship itself doesn't seem to have had a particularly notable career, so I'm not 100% sure why they chose this over some other example of the Edsall class, but presumably they had their reasons. So yeah, if you just buy this, you can get additional fuel tokens just by playing it once a day, and it can rack up to being enough over the course of the entire event that you can afford to miss, I think, an extra 2 or 3 days, something like that. It's not a lot, it's only an extra 3 fuel tokens for playing it, but it's something, I guess. But just as a ship to play, as a ship to buy, ignoring all the Rogue Wave stuff, yeah, it's not great. I mean, it's okay, but it's not great. It's essentially a downgraded Knickerless. Now, there's a small number of things it does better than the Knickerless. It has a slightly longer firing range. Not that that's necessarily a bonus when it comes to US destroyer ballistics. It has half a knot better speed, and it has 1 extra gun compared to the Knickerless second hull, because the Knickerless upgraded hull loses one of its main battery guns for extra AA guns. This, by contrast, has just an overall better AA, I think partly as a result of having that extra dual-purpose 5-inch main battery, but that comes with the caveat that it does not have a defensive AA available, and also with the caveat that I don't know how effective the AA is going to be once Wargaming has done the further balancing of AA power versus planes, because we've just undergone, with the recent patch, a fairly major change to how AA versus planes was calculated. It now focuses on a single plane, but Wargaming has decided maybe they made it a bit too effective and that they're going to possibly give planes more hit points or tinker with the AA calculations further on. So that being one of the main strengths of this ship, it then sort of becomes a bit more of a question mark than a strength, because I don't know if it is going to be a strength once the recalculations are completed. Against the Tier 4 and Tier 6 carriers in the current situation, the current state that it's in, however, the AA is reasonably effective. Hopefully it will continue to be so, because like I said, it really is one of the few strengths of the ship. In terms of stuff that's worse, pure hit points by about 1,000. It's not excessively bad for the tier, but considering you rely a lot on your guns, yeah, less health is not welcome. The base health is actually 12,100 versus the Knickerless with 13,100, and the reason why you're seeing this with 14,000 is because I'm using Alexander Ovechkin as the captain, so that obviously comes with the extra boosted survivability expert skill. I had to think of what it was called there. So yeah, you don't particularly do well for health. You don't get the defensive, as I've mentioned. You have fewer torpedoes, and they are the same torps as the Knickerless, so it's the 5.5 kilometer torps. So Knickerless's ability to put out 12 of them, could be useful on occasion, and this can only put out 9, and it's still a fair few torps, but given how much worse the concealment is, which is by far the worst downgrade compared to the Knickerless, yeah, good luck with that. With the Knickerless, you can just about get to within stealth dropping range. You can't quite. It's 5.5 versus 5.8 kilometers for the Knickerless's surface concealment. So you can sometimes drop ahead of people and have them sail into your torpedoes if you're lucky. And also, compared to the concealment of the Tier 6 and Tier 7 US destroyers, 5.8's not half bad. You don't see 5.8 again until you get to the Benson. So it gives you at least some theoretical advantage when you are down-tiered into Tier 6 and Tier 7 games. You can outspot at least some other destroyers that you're going to meet. The Hill, not so much. The best possible concealment, it's 6.44 kilometers, which is almost as bad as the Farragut. The only thing that's worse at Tier 5 is the Podvoisky, which has arguably much more effective guns, because it has those much flatter Soviet arcs and more effective HE. So, although let's not discount the fact that you have more guns, albeit slightly slower firing guns than the Knickerless, it's not quite slow enough in comparison to negate the fact that you've got the extra gun in terms of broadside DPM. It does still edge it ahead of the 4-gun Knickerless in that regard. But yeah, outside of very close range, which is exactly the same for other US destroyers, the effectiveness of those guns does drop rather sharply, at least when dealing with other targets that can effectively dodge out of the way. Because the US shell ballistics for their 5-inch guns are a tiny wee bit floaty, as you may possibly have noticed whilst playing World of Warships. So given that you're largely forced to rely on your guns, I didn't find it that much of an issue when top tier, but when bottom tier, when you just don't have that stealth, I found this to be not that fun of a ship to play. I mean, that can be true for some Tier 5 destroyers anyway, but generally, most Tier 5s are a lot stealthier than their higher tier counterparts. And the fact that this is a fairly big exception to that rule of thumb really does limit, I think, just the overall enjoyment you're going to get out of this ship. Because it basically takes away one of the few advantages that you get for being down-tiered in a Tier 5 destroyer. You just don't have that sneakiness versus some other higher tier destroyers. And so that alone, makes me find this ship kind of disappointing. And I get that this is a freebie ship, and so Wargaming isn't going to make it anything super fantastic, but as it is, it just feels like a downgraded Knickerless. It's not that good. It really isn't. Honestly, I almost wish they had bumped up, if they were dead set on having that level of concealment, I almost wish they had just bumped up the rest of the stats and stuck it at Tier 6 instead. And then at least it wouldn't have seemed horribly out of place. But on the other hand, then you would be seeing Tier 8 carriers, which would certainly be a lot less fun. So, there is something to be said for being at Tier 5, and only ever having to see at most Tier 6 carriers. But if it was at Tier 6 and had defensive, then the AA might be kind of worth a bit more, maybe, but maybe not. We just don't know with the AA at the moment. It's all in flux at the moment because Wargaming have decided to, tinker with things even further. I seem to remember saying this particularly again about the Prince Eitel Friedrich as well. It's always a bit tricky when the main kind of positive selling point of a ship is, oh hey, it's got good AA, whereas AA tends to be one of the soft balancing factors for Wargaming, and given the massive change we've had to AA recently. You know, it really did take away one of the major selling points of the ITEL Friedrich. And so I don't really see that ship around too much. I don't really expect to see this ship around too much either. It's not to say I haven't had some enjoyment out of it, but it does tend to have been top tier games. I mean, this was actually a tier 6 game, but it wasn't too bad overall. And as you're seeing, it's turning out to be a fairly close game, which was why I picked this particular round. I did have 1 or 2 matches where I did a little bit more damage, but, well, when you're particularly focusing on fighting other destroyers, damage isn't necessarily the be-all, end-all, because, as I'm sure you are aware, but maybe bears mentioning every so often, at least part of your score is based not on how much raw damage you've done, not just the big numbers, but how much percentage of an enemy ship's health you've taken off. And if you are focusing on fighting other destroyers, then you might only have done 30 or 40,000 damage, but if a lot of that damage was against destroyers and you were taking off a high percentage of their hit points, then that's going to be worth more than taking off 10,000 damage from a battleship by probably quite a considerable margin. So I'm quite low health at this point, and oh, that's a Fushan who does have those unpleasantly effective 130mm Soviet guns, and I'm kind of relying on my superior rate of fire. And yes, this is a situation where having the extra gun certainly comes in useful, although you can see as I'm manoeuvring, yeah, I'm not exactly getting the benefit of all of them at the moment, but this Fushan is low enough health that I'm, there we go, going to win this engagement, but at a bit of a cost. I can't really afford to take much more damage at this point, and I was initially coming over here to maybe try and help deal with that Icarus, but at this stage that probably would just lead to me dying. And there's no way I can sneak up on the Icarus. There just isn't. I might be able to come round an island to them at point blank range, but at that point we're as equally likely to just, you know, both die to each other's torpedoes. So instead I decided to have a go at the carrier, because I know AA is at least something at the moment this ship has going for it. Although I can't help but, like, I really wish that this had a defensive available. I really don't understand why it doesn't. I've asked Wargaming why it doesn't have a defensive, why it does have that much worse concealment, but I haven't gotten a reply. I mean, to be fair, this is coming off the weekend with the Community Contributor Summit in St. Petersburg, and also Tank Fest is happening, so there's not that many people in the office or looking at the Discord at the moment, but even so, it would have been nice to get an answer before I put this video out. But as it is, yeah, no, it's a downgraded Knickerless. It's a Knickerless with an extra gun and basically worse everything else. And that's all there is to it, really. So if you absolutely have to have your Edsall class destroyer escort, then you can, and I have to admit, the perma camo, this is actually the inverted perma camo, by the way. This isn't what the regular perma camo colours are. If you like the look of the perma camo, which I have to admit is rather nice when it's inverted, then sure, you know, if you want it just to look at in your port and maybe take out from time to time if you're feeling like something a bit more challenging, then this would certainly fit that criteria. There's even one of the steampunky camos for it. You can get one for both this and for Benham, and I think what I'll actually do for the end bit after the score screens is I'll just show off that camo in port. That is one that you can earn by doing the directives. And I should also actually mention, if you buy this ship, either to get the tokens on the little daily mission that it has, or else just because you want to own it, you can, if you do the directives, then get back the doubloon cost if you you know, have already bought it. So it's not going to be a lot, but if you buy it and then, you know, you just do the directives as well, you'll get a little bonus of doubloons, which is nice, I suppose. You know, it's still going to be a bit of a grind to do it, but you would have to do less to complete the 4 stages of the directives than to do all of the grinding to get fuel tokens in the actual event mode itself. So, you know, a bit less of a grind than the Benham, but still a fair bit of a grind. So we're going to cap this one out. I kind of had figured by this point from where the planes were coming on that, yeah, that Rougeau's gone up to the corner and I'm out of speed boosts. I'm never going to get there in time. I'm perilously low health. It's not going to take a lot to kill me, despite my AA being fairly decent. So I decided to take the safe, sensible option and just sit in the cap instead and use my long-lasting US smoke. I mean, heck, you know, that's actually a thing they could have done. You know, if they wanted to give it at least something different from the Knickerless, it could have an extra, you know, 5 or 10 seconds of smoke laying compared to the Knickerless, but it doesn't. It's just regular US smoke, which, you know, is still admittedly pretty good, but it's absolutely no different from the Knickerless in that regard. So, yeah. So 47k damage, 13 plane kills, which was actually more than anyone else on the team. But I don't know how much of that was the Rougeau not playing very well, how much was the buffed AA, and how much was just the ship itself, you know, the capabilities. That one's a bit of a question mark. Basically all gun damage, a little bit of fire damage. It's like typically low rate of fire setting for US destroyer shells, so it's not really that surprising. Decent credits with flags and the perma camo and the rest of it, but yeah, I can't say I've had that much fun with this ship. It would be nice to have something that was a bit fun and a bit different, and I'm not asking for a US Gremiashi, heck no, but maybe something a bit more like the Ochotnik versus the Podvoisky, where there's at least, you know, some differentiation between them. And as it is, no, not really. It's just a worse Knickerless. So that's it for the USS Hill. I will also be looking at the Benham in the very near future. I'm still waiting to get a suitable match for it. I'll tell you now, I kind of like the ship, but the grind, oof, the grind. Yeah, I don't know if it's worth that level of grind. I think Wargaming's maybe gone a bit overboard, but let's save that for the actual Benham video. So hopefully you found this video useful, and if you did, you can do all the usual things down underneath it. And of course, as always, stay tuned for more.